Hi guys, it's Julie Spencer, author of the Buxton Peak series. Today we are working our way through Buxton Peak, The Early Years, which is the prequel to my Buxton Peak trilogy. And I hope that if you like these videos in the Read to Me series that you will subscribe to my channel so that you can get the new videos as they come out, and that you will like the videos on YouTube and share them on social media so that others can enjoy these as well. Okay? Buxton Peak, The Early Years. Chapter 2, The High Peak. "Let's go to Buxton for the weekend," Ian said to Kai. "I want to show you guys the view from the high peak, and I think it would be a good place to get some inspiration. Plus, I haven't seen my dad in a while. I'm glad we have a flat so close to school, but I miss seeing my dad every day." Ian sidled up next to the group of girls by his locker and dialed his combination. Flashing them a quick grin and winking at the cute redhead, he grabbed his geography textbook and slammed the locker closed. "I've got inspiration right here." Kai brushed off Ian's suggestion and wrapped his arm around a blonde girl named Cherie. "I don't need to climb a mountain." Ian recognized a lost opportunity and decided to postpone the discussion about his idea. "Ladies, you know you're all beautiful, but if you want to hang out with Kai, you're going to have to come with us to geography class because I can't be late. If I get another low mark on an exam, my mom won't let me stay here at Chorlton." "Oh, Ian," said the little redhead Janie, "that would be like the worst thing that could ever happen." She pouted her lips, batted her eyelashes, and then slipped her hand into his and dragged him in the direction of the geography room. "Worst ever?" Ian allowed himself to be pulled forward. "We wouldn't want that." He kept his hand in Janie's all the way down the hall until they turned the corner and ran into head teacher Wallace. Ian dropped Janie's hand and the girls stepped away. Public displays of affection were not allowed at school, and the boys were already in enough trouble for skipping physical education class the previous week. They'd snuck into one of the practice rooms behind the band room and played guitar for the entire period. "Ladies, get to class." Mr. Wallace glared at the boys. "Gentlemen, may I have a word with you?" "Of course, Mr. Wallace." Ian walked down the hall, his arm around his head teacher's shoulders as if he was the one directing the conversation. "Walk with me as I go to geography class." "You do realize those girls are only 15, right?" That's going to be a problem. I'm only 14. "Dating an older woman, huh?" Kai said from behind them. "You're a stud, Ian." "Mr. Burton, you're in just as much trouble as Mr. Taylor. I'd watch your mouth, son." "Aw, Mr. Wallace," Ian said. "We weren't doing anything wrong. The girls just naturally flocked to us because we're such nice boys. I'm sure you understand. You were a boy once. Did you have a lot of girlfriends when you were young, Mr. Wallace?" "Don't change the subject, Ian." "Well, here we are at geography class. Thank you for escorting us, Mr. Wallace. I'm sure my mom will be very grateful I made it here in time." Ian pulled Kai into the classroom and they sauntered to the back of the room where 2 empty seats were sandwiched between Gary and Andy. "That was close," Kai said. "What'd you do this time?" Andy asked. "Just a couple of girls." Ian grinned. "You did what to a couple of girls?" Gary's voice was a little too loud and several students' heads turned with wide eyes and gaping jaws. "Nothing," Ian shushed them, but didn't stop the smile from reaching his eyes. "We did nothing wrong." Kai put his hands behind his head and leaned back in his chair, propping himself against the back wall of the classroom. He raised his eyebrows at the girl at the desk closest to his and smirked. She blushed and turned around with a soft giggle. "I kind of like girls," Kai said. "I know you do, mate." Ian patted his best friend on the knee and faced forward. The teacher strolled to the map and began droning on about Middle Eastern landforms. "I still say we need to visit the high peak." "The way I see it, people are not going to take us seriously unless we can write our own music." Ian tossed a small rock as far as he could and watched it bounce down the hill. "They're not going to take us seriously until you've grown a foot or two," Andy pointed out. "You sound like my Sunday school teacher," Ian said. A song from his younger days at church came rushing into his mind, a tune about wanting to serve as a missionary when he was all grown up. Whatever, that's a long time from now, he thought. "Seriously, though," Kai said, Just because you two played a tiny little drum duel doesn't mean that you can somehow become rock stars. You're just a couple of kids. We are just a group of kids. Ian held his hands out to stop them and got their attention. We have to include all of us in this conversation. Kai, you've played the electric guitar for years. Andy, you can be the bass. And Gary, you obviously would be the drummer. What are you going to do? Kai folded his arms across his chest and raised his eyebrows. I'll be the singer. Ian nodded once as if it was all decided. The only songs you know how to sing are hymns. Kai pushed Ian's shoulder. Ugh, why would anyone want to sing hymns? Even at a church. Gary shuddered. My grandma made me go to church once, Andy said. It was really boring. I know how to sing more than just hymns, Ian mumbled. He stomped away from them and let them continue their joking. How can I get them to take this seriously, he thought. Suddenly he jumped onto a large rock and belted out the opening line of You Give Love a Bad Name by Bon Jovi. All three guys looked up at Ian as if he was crazy. No one spoke for a long moment, and then Kai sang up to Ian, continuing the second line of the iconic rock song. They harmonized together. You give love a bad name. You have a great voice, Andy said, his eyes wide. Gary nodded in agreement. We need make-out songs. Ian jumped down off the rock. You've never snogged in your life, Kai scoffed. That's not the point. Ian stopped him and tried to keep the conversation on track. We need to make it seem as if we know what we're talking about. We need hard rock love songs, breakup songs, that kind of thing. Like the boy bands of the 90s? Gary shook his head. Yuck, I don't want something my mom would listen to. We're not a boy band, Ian said. We're a rock band, like Bon Jovi or Aerosmith. Pal, we're not even officially a band, Kai interrupted. Are we? Why not? Ian shrugged. We're talented enough. We're barely out of primary school, Kai said. You haven't even reached puberty yet. I have too, Ian said. Prove it. Kai folded his arms across his chest. How do you prove that? Go out with a girl, Kai said, narrowing his eyes and stepping closer to Ian. I dare you. Yeah, and get her past second base, Gary chided. You know good Mormon boys don't do that. Ian shook his head. My dad would kill me. Your dad would never have to find out. Andy raised his eyebrows and smirked. God would know, Ian nodded definitively. I don't believe in God, Kai said. All conversation halted. Andy tried to get back on track. All right, so Ian's not going to snog a girl. Whatever. What are we going to name our band? What about little Janie? Gary interrupted. She probably wants Ian. Lots of girls want Ian. Kai pushed Gary's arm. He's just oblivious. I didn't say I'd never snog anyone, Ian grumbled. He huffed away, stepping back up on the rock and looking down at the town where he grew up. If he told them what he really thought, they'd laugh. Ian had been taught as a youth how sacred his body is and how anything more than kissing should wait until he was married. He also knew what girls wanted. He wasn't stupid. He knew what Janie wanted. But more important than that, he knew what God wanted. I don't care what Kai says, he thought. I know there's a God, and he wants me to keep my body and mind pure and focused on what's right and good. He made me, and he made this earth, and he even made this peak high above Buxton just so I could look down and appreciate it. Buxton. Peak. Ian snapped his fingers. We could name our band after the town where I grew up and the forest that surrounds it. Perfect. Ian halted his internal conversation and turned to where the guys were still contemplating whether or not Ian would ever lose his virginity. Ian sighed at their idiocies. How about Buxton Peak? The teasing quieted. They all looked up at him, and the irony of the moment wasn't lost on Ian. He was the musical genius behind this arrangement. He was their leader. He raised his eyebrows and stared directly at his closest friend, Kai. I like it. Kai's statement was almost lost to the wind, but Ian heard his words loud and clear. Something in Kai's expression shifted, and they nodded at one another. Buxton Peak it is, then. Ian hopped off the rock and pulled everyone together, draping their arms around one another's shoulders. "Let's rock! Let's rock!" Andy, Kai, and Gary answered. Buxton Peak was born. They were officially a rock band. "Do you want my honest opinion?" George Taylor glanced sidelong at Ian as he drove home from church. Ian sat behind his mom, so it didn't take much effort to have a conversation with his dad. "Yeah, Dad, I wouldn't have asked if I didn't want to know what you thought." Ian leaned forward and rested his chin on the back of the upholstered seat of his parents' modest sedan. As a geologist and curator of the local museum, George had made a decent living for their family. They didn't have fancy cars or an expensive home, but Ian had never gone hungry. "They don't share our values, and I'm afraid you're going to make poor choices if you spend a great deal of time with them." This weekend had been the first time George had met Ian's mates. His mom had seen them in passing at school and even hosted a small dinner for them at their rented flat in the city. But having all the guys sleep over for the weekend was different. "That's kind of harsh. They're my best pals." Ian folded his arms across his chest and grumbled, "I'm not going to make poor choices." "What about them? Are they going to make bad choices?" Boys who have rock bands get involved in all kinds of negative behavior. Are they prepared to deal with temptations like drugs and girls? "I don't know," Ian said. "You have the teachings of the church as your foundational bedrock," George said. "Do they?" "Please don't start talking rocks and geology to me, Dad." Ian wrinkled his nose. "We're not at your museum." "We just want you to be careful." Ian's mom turned completely around in her seat and looked pointedly in Ian's direction. "You know I've always supported your music, but a rock band is walking a fine line. Remember the teachings of your youth, Ian." "I will, Mom." Ian frowned and scanned the rolling hills between the road and the horizon. Later that day, they'd be heading back down the mountain for another week at school. He loved coming to Buxton and spending the weekends with his dad, but Ian was increasingly drawn to Manchester. No, not Manchester, to Chorlton High School. No, it wasn't even that. The band room, the recording studio, the guitars, the microphones, the soundproof room, the music. The music was calling to him, like an addiction. What have I gotten myself into? And that is the end of Chapter 2 of Buxton Peak, the Early Years. I hope that if you like this, that you will give it a thumbs up and like on YouTube, and that you'll subscribe to my channel and share these on social media so that others can enjoy this as well. Next time, we will start into Chapter 3.